This is No Hate Radio.
I'm no stranger to the rain. Oh, no. I'm no stranger to the rain.
Welcome to No Hate Radio. This is Season 2, Episode 2. Those of you who are continuing listeners are familiar with our theme and our approach, which is that we broadcast at the intersection of law, public policy, and social justice. Our continuing approach is to ask, why does a particular circumstance or fact or set of facts exist, and what are we going to do about it? And we continue that approach throughout each of our broadcasts. In Season 2, we have a new focus. Our focus is to highlight people, organizations, groups who are engaged in humanitarian and other efforts on an ongoing basis to hopefully do the following things: make lives better for people, resist injustice, speak truth to power, which is hard, difficult to do, or otherwise resist the hostile and oppressive use and abuse of power. Now, our topic today, broadly, and I will say very broadly, is immigration. Immigration is and has been a hotbed of controversy and absolute epicenter of pain and misery, and a long, long game of political football where essentially nobody wins. More specifically, today's discussion will center on the ongoing efforts of an organization called Witness at the Border. And we have the unique privilege of hearing from Dr. Kate Pravera. Dr. Kate Pravera is theologian-in-residence at Allendale United Methodist Church. And for our purposes here, she is a boots-on-the-ground witness at the border. And I wanted very badly to have Dr. Pravera appear with us today so that she could pass on those experiences, because she is a person who can come from where she sits today and recollect. I think she's going to tell us that she's been in the borderland at least twice and spent time with this organization. One little anecdote I want to do before we start on that subject is ask Dr. Kate Pravera to tell us, introduce herself, but tell us where she came by her last name, Pravera.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for having me today. So my last name is Pravera, and it is a name that I created some 40 years ago. I was in seminary at the time and found myself getting divorced after 4 years of marriage. I did not want to revert to my so-called maiden name, it's what we called it at the time, nor did I want to keep my ex-husband's name. So another woman at the seminary was going through something similar, and she chose to create a new name for herself. That inspired me to do the same. And so I thought about what I would like my name to mean, and I came up with the idea of practicing truth. So the PRA is from practice, la práctica, and the VER from verdad, veritas. And I must say, Don, if I had to do that again today, I would not be quite so bold. I think it was a little arrogant at the age of 26 to take that name on, because it sets such a high standard. But when all is said and done, it's been an important guidepost for me as well.
I think it has, and I've had occasion to get to know you, Dr. Pravera, and I would say that you're working very hard at living up to that name. It's hard. Like a friend of mine who was a Texas Ranger one time said, And being a Texas Ranger is a hell of a thing. You can't live up to the legend, and you can't live it down. You may be in that same kind of position. In any event, I would like, and I think this is important, kind of understand what a thing called witness at the border is. What does it do? Who are some of the people involved? And the witness at the border comes from, or at least as I read in their website, it has to do with the notion that if people actually see and feel and hear what's going on, it's very difficult for people to cloak it, mask it, or cause it to be something that it's not. With that, I'd like to ask you to introduce your boots on the ground experience there, and can you tell us about some of that?
Absolutely. I've made 3 different trips with Witness at the Border now, and I'm looking at a 4th in the near future. The one I'd like to talk about is an experience in April of 2023, and the setting is Eagle Pass, Texas. Eagle Pass is a city on the northern side of the border, and Piedras Negras is the city on the other side. I went with a friend, a colleague here in St. Petersburg, and we joined perhaps a dozen other people, so it was a small group. The idea was, in particular, to see what was happening at Eagle Pass, because the governor there, Greg Abbott, was ramping up the military presence more and more. So our group, again, we have the privilege of crossing the border back and forth with our U.S. passports. We went for 2 days, and we stood on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande. It is, in my view, a sacred path where people have prepared to cross the river for a very, very long time. Many people have died and continue to die along this path. This is where we stood. In fact, on the bank of the Rio Grande, we found an old cross, and there were names of people who had died engraved on this cross, about 3 foot high, 3 feet. So we stood there and we looked across, we looked from Mexico across the river to Texas, where we could plainly see what the border people were doing as immigrants tried to enter the United States.
Many of those immigrants, as I take it from your talk and from what else I've learned and know, many of those folks are seeking asylum because they're coming from places where they're actually in danger.
Absolutely.
In the place they came from.
Absolutely. Seeking asylum. So I say this in the first person. Let's look across the border at the United States. I see the faint shadows of indigenous peoples who called this land home for 15,000 years. I see the Spanish conquistadores in the name of Christianity bringing daggers and crossbows, invading their land and slaughtering them. I see the U.S. cavalry following later with sabers and swords to seize the land we now call Texas. So let us see that the humble people who lived on this land have been the victims of bloody invasions by colonial powers. Texas was not our land to begin with.
I'd like to follow that with an invited comment. I know that your experience there carried with it a lot of emotional aspect as well as practical, and as well as an effort to understand the circumstances. The same is true with me, and I've told the listeners on No Hate Radio, when you're a seventh generation Texan, you can't help but absorb the whole Texas mentality. But I share with you that I've spent a lot of time on the borderland, from El Paso all the way down to Brownsville, and in every small city, whether it's Laredo or Eagle Pass. Sort of hard to call it a city. It's Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras across the river, and all those border towns, and the people who live in what they call the borderland. And I think your perspective, the history that you just outlined, what you can see, what you can feel, what you can hear, that land has been a subject of massive conflict for generations. And people have died there. They have tried to survive there. There's a whole area in Texas called the Colonias. And when I served for the governor of Texas a long time ago in the late 80s on Intergovernmental Relations Commission, we spent a fair amount of time traveling the border and going into the Colonias. And what the Colonias are areas where so-called land developers, people who would buy land and would sell that land, what we experienced was on written contracts that were usually in English, and the people who bought them couldn't even understand what they were signing. And there was no infrastructure built, and there was no sewage, and there were no roads and no anything. And it was literally what we used to call third world conditions in the Colonias. And what I saw was that people were so desperate for a better life that they risk dying, they risk being captured, they risk a lot of bad things just to live in the Colonias. And I've told this story once before, Dr. Pravera, about a time when I was the chair of the Intergovernmental Relations Commission. We're driving this black Suburban with this state of Texas seal on the door and all that. And I never realized how foreign that must look to the people living in the Colonias. But as we drove in there and I was looking at the people in the Colonias and the conditions that they were living in, I was stricken with the fact that I felt like I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. And I felt like they probably felt like I was from the backside of the moon, because they had no understanding of anything like that. So the Texas borderland in and of itself, and I don't exclude New Mexico. It's the same in New Mexico, probably in Arizona. But I understand that generations of suffering have taken place on the border, and yet historically there have been de facto arrangements, not legal, because our Congress has never, ever been able to develop a comprehensive immigration plan. But there have been a lot of de facto arrangements made where people cross the borders back and forth without proper, quote, documentation. And everyone assumed that that's the way it was going to work for generations to come. And it was that way when I was growing up, and it was that way when I attended law school at Lubbock at Texas Tech. And folks would come over and work the cotton fields and go north and come south and earn some money and go back to Mexico. It was a culture. It was a culture. But it was not considered a crisis or a national problem like it became later. Sadly, it did. So I want to turn it back to you, Dr. Pravera. Those are my personal observations about the borderland.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Don. It really fits right in. I'm struck here as I look at these excerpts from a talk I gave a year ago, the contrast between what was shocking 1 year ago and what is shocking today, because what I thought was shocking then now is a lesser degree, if you will. So I'll just explain here, and I'm reading a short excerpt. Again, I'm standing with others on the Mexican side of the border in Piedras Negras, looking across the Rio Grande. I see an impenetrable wall of railroad cars and concertina wire built to ensure that people without legal documentation do not enter our country. Earlier in 2023, this was April, the time I'm speaking of, earlier in 2023, in defiance of the U.S. Supreme Court, Texas Governor Greg Abbott took a public park with a golf course and he turned it into a military encampment. All of this was in response to the so-called immigrant invasion. Indeed, we did not see an invasion at that time. We saw a public park that was taken from the community, so they no longer had that green space to recreate. And we saw the strong military presence. Now, I want you to know there were 1,000 Florida National Guard troops and several other Florida law enforcement agencies participating in this travesty, courtesy of Florida taxpayer dollars. That's your dollars, Don, and mine paying for them to be there. And while that was shocking at the time, today it seems less so because of the slippery slope our nation has gone on. So, hear this part. Our witness group sees military patrol gunboats cruising up and down the Rio Grande. I'm told they carry AR-15s. We see this macho show of force, a ruthless display of power. We see the military-industrial complex, a modern-day version, if you will, of sabers and crossbows, but far more lethal.
I would add to your comments there that this immigrant invasion that we hear about it on some of the news media. We hear about it from some public officials. We hear about the surge of thousands of, I guess, the hordes of people supposedly invading the country. It's always been my belief that if there's going to be an invasion, the invaders need to be dangerous. That is, they need to be carrying guns. They need to be able to roll over the area they're trying to, quote, invade. They need to have power. They need to be a military establishment. What I have seen, and I'm going to ask you to comment on this too, what I have seen is that the so-called invaders don't have any guns. They don't have any power. They don't even have any vehicles. They have nothing that would constitute an invasion force.
Barely the clothes on their back, Don.
Right. That's what they've got. And so when you compare, I guess I'll use the term firepower, at the hands of the, quote, defenders against the invasion, it doesn't seem to be a fair fight. It doesn't seem to be something that constitutes an invasion. I'll leave that as my comment. And again, it comes from years and years, and now I got to admit to being old, decades of physically seeing the borderland. Anyway, I'm going to turn it back to you.
It's not an invasion, indeed. It's families, it's individuals seeking relief from the oppression in their own countries, such as Venezuela. So here's my second day at the vigil now, and again, I'm on the Mexican side of the border, looking across the Rio Grande. We stood, most of us, having forgotten to bring something to sit on, and a small group of people suddenly come into view on the Texas side of the border. They came out of nowhere. We see a small boy and a very pregnant woman. They walk up to the gate of the military encampment on the Texas side with their backpacks and their plastic bags. That's what they bring for the so-called invasion, Don, is plastic bags of this and that, whatever they're able to bring. So our group starts to shout across the water in Spanish to them, offering messages of love and support. They tell us they are from Ecuador, which I later learned is 2,700 miles away. And you can pretty much bet they walked most or all of that distance. So they approach two soldiers who are standing behind a very high gate covered in razor wire, and they plead for entry. We see the soldiers refuse to open the gate, and our Ecuadorian siblings have no recourse but to continue treading down the river's edge under the 98-degree Texas sun. The path that they tread on was so narrow. A simple slip in the mud could cause you to stumble right into the concertina wire on one side or fall into the river on the other, which I can tell you has 3 varieties of venomous snakes. We stood there motionless. It was so hard to believe they were being turned away in the circumstances they were in. We cried out, "Que les vaya bien," goodbye, may all go well for you. Our vigil group watches in silence as they walk away and disappear from view. You know, we were fairly certain they would not meet a happy end on their journey. In the heat, with no water or very little water, it's very likely that they did not make it and that we witnessed essentially a murder on behalf of the guards there when they turned those people away.
Well, this is the point, I think, of Witness at the Border as a group, as an organization, as a group of people trying to do some humanitarian purpose, is that you can't be misled. You can't be lied to if you've seen it yourself.
That's right.
And
That's right.
Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You go right ahead.
Well, and I think that I have more credibility when I talk about this topic now because I have been there personally and can say, I saw this with my own eyes. I have photos, as a matter of fact. But you know, it's not a time for pity, for pitying the people who are turned away. Because this is precisely the point when seeing becomes subversive. This phrase, seeing becomes subversive, is a key point of Witness at the Border, because we don't see as an end in itself. We see that as a number of things. First of all, we become more conscious of our own role in the fact that this is happening, and we become liberated from our own ignorance, if you will. Once we're liberated from that ignorance, we see the moral imperative to do something. Now, in this moment, it's very hard to know what to do, but I can tell you where we stand right now. Having used our eyes, it's time to use our voices and resist and speak up. And I think it's time for people to step out there and take the risk and be the ones to speak up, not wait for somebody else to do it and then join in, because they might be waiting for you, Don, to do it. I've observed that just in the last few days, hearing more and more encouragement for people to speak. And that's the message I would leave with your listeners today, is even though most people have not seen this in person, we know that it is happening. We know that people are dying because they're turned away, and we need to speak up.
Thank you, Dr. Pravera. Here's a couple of things I want to add. This organization, Witness at the Border, They've been doing this for a while, a number of years, and
Before the pandemic.
yes, and they are starting now this year. This year, there's going to be a workshop for justice, is what they call it, and it's the second one they've done, I think, and a short, what they call journey, but I'll explain to you what it is. The dates are March 9th through the 16th of 2025, coming right up, very short time. It's, I believe the organizers are calling it the 2025 Witness Response. And here's what happens. It'll start in San Antonio, Texas, a place in which I'm intimately familiar. And you travel down, I know how to get there. You travel down Interstate 35, which honestly, if you've never been there, sometimes it does look like the backside of the moon from San Antonio to the borderland, to Laredo. And then to Eagle Pass. Eagle Pass, Texas is a county seat of a Texas county. It is almost indistinguishable from Piedras Negras, which is simply divided only by the river.
That's right.
And otherwise, it's a single town. A huge example of that is El Paso and Ciudad Juarez up the road. But this is the rural version. This is the small town version. So they're going to conduct 2 days in Eagle Pass, in and around Eagle Pass. And then up to El Paso. El Paso is an amazing place. It's it's where worlds collide. El Paso, Texas is on the New Mexico border. It's also on the Mexico border. Ciudad Juarez is a city of 1 million people. El Paso, Texas, city of 500,000. And then Anthony, New Mexico, and some other places right across the border. So you have this massive combined population that are living under multiple different governments. And you can literally see a difference in culture, a difference in lifestyle. You can stand on Interstate 10 in El Paso. You don't want to stand on it, they'll run over you, but stand next to Interstate 10 El Paso and look across the river to what appears to be people living in a different century. Mm-hmm. And that's how I want to try to, in a feeble kind of way, create a picture of what El Paso and Juarez looks like if you're there. 2 days there. Then on to, and I think I'm saying this right, Ajo, Arizona, where there will be the rest of the conference that goes from the 14th to the 16th of March. People who are interested can sign up on the website. They have their website is simply Witness at the Border. You can get it, and it's on their one of their witness reports on the January 22nd, 2025 entry is the information about how you, if you're interested and if you something you think you want to go see for yourself, contact Witness at the Border and do it through that form and register and become a part of the resistance, because I don't really want to take a position as to which side of the political aisle anyone is on. I want to say this. When I was a part of the Texas government a long, long time ago, a guy who was then lieutenant governor said one time, there's 3 agendas in Texas. There's the Democrat agenda, the Republican agenda, and the Texas agenda. Well, here, there's the Republican, the Democrat agendas, and the humanitarian agenda. So I don't care much whether you put an R or a D or an I or nothing beside your name. What you need to do if you're going to express an opinion, if you're going to say, I want to be a part of what makes the world better, go see it for yourself. Drive that borderland or fly it like me.
I would add to that, Don, in terms of taking sides. The way we talk about it here at Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Petersburg is we are on the side of love. And when we look at our siblings, indeed they are, with love, we know that we are called to action. We can do nothing less. And again, that action starts with using our voices. I do encourage people to check out this opportunity and learn more at witnessattheborder.org.
Yeah, it's outstanding group. And again, this is part of what we're doing in season 2. We spent a lot of season 1, talking about the election and all the politics surrounding the election. That's over now. And we live in a particular environment, and a particular administration is in control. So what we need to be focused on now, and I think what we're trying to do, is seek out and find individuals or groups of people or organizations that are taking a stand to say what we're doing is not right, and we need to, quote, do something about it, or what we are doing is right, and we're going to keep doing it. I use as examples of that maybe the League of Women Voters and some of the other organizations that we hope to talk with, because as of now, I believe, I say without fear of too much contradiction, that if you are a person who is not aligned with or a part of a very intense power structure, but you don't believe things are right, that the only way that you can exercise humanity or a humanitarian goal, or the only way that you can, as Dr. Pravera said, the only way that you can come from a viewpoint of love is to call out verbally, vocally, and physically, and as you see things and you know they're wrong, call them out. Be a part of that voice, maybe in the wilderness, maybe you're a voice in the wilderness, but I'm going to say it this way. You have 2 choices in 2025. As Project 2025 is brought into a reality from the national government, the administration has, I think they now call it Plan 47, but the point is it's the same thing. And as that comes into existence around us, we're at a time that's almost unique. It isn't unique, but it's been a long time since we've been at a point in history where we are now, where a person either has to be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. You don't get much of a chance to be nowhere or to be in the middle. You're either on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. Use humanitarianism. If you don't like the term love, if you think that's too squishy, okay, use the term humanitarian. If you have that kind of a bent in your approach to life, know that it's your obligation. You didn't necessarily ask for it, but it's your obligation to call out what's going on that isn't humanitarian or isn't based in love. So, we are here again on No Hate Radio. And what we hope is that something we say will cause you to send us an email off of our website, which is nohateradio.com. It's very simple. All one word, nohateradio.com. You got something you think we need to talk about? Something we haven't talked about? You want to amplify or controvert something we've said? Send us an email. Or call us on our call-in line. You can leave a message on that line. It's 442-4-NO-HATE. 442-4-NO-HATE Radio. and leave us a message. Tell us what you think we're doing right or wrong. Tell us what you'd like to do. And if you happen to be involved in an organization or a group, or you're just individually out doing something by these criteria, trying to make life better for somebody, trying to oppose oppression and mistreatment, trying to get people to do the right thing, let us know. Let us know. You'll talk on No Hate Radio and explain that program, just like Dr. Kate Pravera did today about Witness at the Border. There are other people trying to do good stuff. Be a part of it. This is No Hate Radio.